Hey everyone, it's Terry, and we are back for part three of four of the Deadliest American Hoax. And so, where we left off, I'm trying to get my little PowerPoint thing here going. Where we left off, uh, let's see what's going on. There we go. Where we left off was with the resignation letter, and I'm not going to go over that again. And so now so he resigned January 22nd, 1975. And by 1979, Dr. Nathanson was 100% pro-life. He couldn't figure out any reason why a woman would have to abort her baby, including rape, incest, life of the mother. He was actually trying to figure out how early he could remove the baby from the womb and keep the baby alive and meet the mother's wishes. Okay, so that was by 1979, 100% pro-life, and he was still an atheist. And I think that's very, very important for everybody to know. And when I interviewed him, he really drove the point home that he became pro-life as an atheist. I think Dr. Nathanson understood the culture we now live in, where so many people do not have faith in Jesus Christ. And so it's possible to become 100% pro-life without being a person of faith. All right, so then we enter the 1980s, and it's now 1984, and Dr. Nathanson is wondering what actually happens to the baby during an abortion. And so he asks one of his abortionist friends, Dr. Jay Kellinson out of New Jersey, if if he would be willing to do an ultrasound video of a first trimester abortion, and it's recorded. And this is what happens. And by the way, this video, as far as I know, can still be viewed out on YouTube. You just have to type in the name Dr. Bernard Nathanson, The Silent Scream. And what you'll see, it's a grainy video, but there are some very poignant parts in this video. So what happens is when Dr. Kellinson, Dr. Nathanson, and the nurse watch the raw video footage, the nurse quits that day. Dr. Kellinson supposedly never does another abortion. And Dr. Nathanson spirals into a very deep depression, which leads him to suicidal thoughts for the remainder of the 1980s. Because what they saw was the baby, it's the image of the suction tube puncturing the amniotic sac, and they're monitoring the baby's heartbeat, and the heartbeat goes super high. I'm forgetting what the numbers are, but it goes super high. And now I can only surmise that the baby is sensing danger. Maybe people are going to argue with that, but regardless, the heartbeat goes super high. And then Dr. Nathanson is pointing this out on the video. This little baby, who I believe is a 12-week old baby, first trimester, opens his or her mouth in a silent scream of a child threatened imminently with extinction. That is a direct quote from Dr. Nathanson. So, my appeal to the men and the women who are listening, watching this presentation, is that we must start hearing the silent screams, the millions and millions of silent screams of yesteryear, and then the more than 1 million that will happen this year. And then a few years later, in 1987, Dr. Nathanson made another film. Oh, by the way, the silent scream was shown at the White House to President Ronald Reagan. And we believe that because of what he learned, from Dr. Nathanson, and Dr. Nathanson was invited onto I'm gonna call it a committee for the Health and Human Services back then, under Ronald Reagan. C. Everett Koop was the what do you call it, the U.S. Surgeon General, at that time. So we believe it led to Ronald Reagan writing the Personhood Amendment. I think I talk about that a little bit later on. But this video was shown, this documentary was shown at the White House, and it sent gyrations through the media. Just the media's falling apart that such a video had been shown, and it made national news to a certain degree. Okay, and then a couple years later, 1987, Dr. Nathanson makes another video, a documentary of Eclipse of Reason. And he did this because a lot of the fake news, we all now know there's so much fake news, they were charging Dr. Nathanson with doctoring the video, with manipulating the video, which nothing was manipulated at all. Nothing was photoshopped or whatever you would call it back then. Nothing was. And so he decided that he would make this other video, and sadly, it was of a 20-week-old baby being aborted, and it's horrible because it shows just limb by limb. I mean, it's the real video camera footage of the expulsion of the baby, and it's horrific. Charlton Heston does the introduction to this video, and I challenge everybody to watch it. Open your eyes to what abortion really is, okay? Because we've forgotten about these little children, or many people have. Not necessarily you, but millions of people have. So anyway, so now Dr. Nathanson he has suicidal thoughts. He never pulls the trigger. He never swallows the pills, but he's looking for answers. What does he do with all this grief, all this guilt? Plus, he's, killed two of his own children. He's personally responsible for the death of 75,000 babies, directly, responsible by running that facility and unleashing all these lies onto America. And we ended up with Roe v. Wade. So can you imagine what that would feel like? So then we have the Personhood Proclamation in 1988. That's my favorite picture right there, because this is, such a seed of truth. And there's Ronald Reagan. If you've never read the Personhood Proclamation of 1988, please do. If you do get my book, I have it as one of the appendices in the book. Okay, and I think it's important in this video to share too that we also have Norma McCorvey's affidavit. Norma McCorvey is the Roe of Roe v. Wade. Most people don't know that Roe never had an abortion. Okay, she was a poor little white lady from the wrong side of the tracks that two very aggressive, progressive, left-wing, liberal-leaning female attorneys used as the plaintiff in the Roe v. Wade case. And that woman never had an abortion. Her child is still alive today. Norma McCorvey became pro-life, and 30 years after the Roe v. Wade decision in 2003, Norma filed, I'm not sure what you call it, filed a plea to the Supreme Court to re-listen, to re-examine the Roe v. Wade decision, because she filed an affidavit, that's the word I was looking at, the affidavit at the court explaining how these two attorneys used her own ignorance to advance the Roe v. Wade case. Norma didn't even understand what was going on or what the implications would be, and she didn't really even understand what an abortion was. And you've got to read this affidavit. And again, that's one of the appendices in my book as well. So now you've got the backstory of how, at least the man behind the mission. We're going to be learning the 8-point strategy really soon. But now Dr. Nathanson he's just dying inside. And he wrote about this. I required not a cure, but healing. He went to a rabbi. The rabbi didn't have answers. He went to a psychologist, psychiatrists. They didn't have answers. And his path did cross with a very influential clergyman. And I'll tell you about him in just a second. But in Nathanson's 1984-85 book called The Abortion Papers, he wrote this, and I'm going to read the full paragraph because, again, this is, I think just this paragraph alone could cause America to reevaluate, this notion about legalized abortion. He wrote, "I believe the abortion ethic is fatally and forever flawed by the immorality of the means of its victory. A political victory achieved by such odious tactics is at best an unstable tyranny, spawned by an unscrupulous and unprincipled minority. I believe that an America which allows a junta of moral thugs to foist an evil of incalculable dimensions upon it and continues to permit that evil to flower creates for itself a deadly legacy, a millennium of shame." Such a powerful quote. And before I get into the baptism part, I want to take it all the way because this quote, I was able to get this into a United States Supreme Court amicus brief with Abby Johnson. I'm forgetting the name of the case, but when the lawyers found out that Nathanson said what I'm getting ready to show you, the full quote, they're like, "Oh my gosh, give us that quote, give us the citation. We need this in the lawsuit." So you know how the abortion people get away with, "Oh, it's a decision between a woman and her doctor." No, it's not, and it never has been. And the father of the abortion industry makes that very clear. So in the Abortion Papers book, this is what Dr. Nathanson wrote. Giving it, meaning abortion, just the barest patina of a medical judgment made abortion infinitely more palatable, infinitely more acceptable, and politically more palatable. It'd be easy, much easier as long as, we involve that man or the woman in that white lab coat, that medical doctor, because they're so smart, right? All right, so then he goes on to say, in actual fact, the abortion decision is no more the doctor's decision than a nose job is. And it's the woman alone who decides if she wants her nose fixed, her breast done, or her child destroyed. It's never been a decision between a woman and the doctor. Okay, the doctor's there to collect the cash. Okay, it's just a job for him, just to get it done. Okay, so if the father of the abortion industry, okay, can become pro-life, but fully pro-life by 1979 and give us all this evidence, what more can we do when we make this story known nationwide? All right. Oh, I didn't finish. And she merely involves the doctor as the instrument of her decision. So that's the full quote. So the doctor is just the executionist. Okay. So by 1989, he's in this real quandary. Of course, I'm sure the devil's trying to pull his soul one way with suicide. But what happens is Dr. Nathanson, he's in New York City, which, by the way, I forgot to tell you on here that, back in 1970, when they were launching, NARAL, they first focused on the state of New York because New York had a 140-year-old pro-life law on the books where abortion was illegal in the state of New York. Okay. Now they light up the Eiffel Tower celebrating aggressive pro-abortion laws. Okay, and if you miss that in the news, I give seminars, that covers that. But anyway, Dr. Nathanson went to Planned Parenthood in 1970 asking Planned Parenthood to join with NARAL to try to get that 140-year-old law overturned in the state of New York, and Planned Parenthood refused to join with NARAL in 1970. They refused. Nathanson was so mad, and he stomped out of the headquarters of Planned Parenthood in New York and went back to NARAL, and they united a very fractured pro-abortion movement, and they managed to overturn that 140-year-old law that protected babies in the womb, they flipped it in 18 months. Okay. I forgot to go over that, but that's okay. You got the information now. So now it's all these years later, January 1989, and he goes to a Planned Parenthood where the pro-lifers in January 89, they're having a big, they call it a sit-in. So it's cold, it's windy, it might be snowing. The elements were very harsh. And Nathanson went there because he wanted to write an article about whether or not it's ethical to have these sit-ins because there's so many people there. I think it was either 1,200 or 1,500 people there, making it very difficult for a woman seeking an abortion and having to walk through the front door of Planned Parenthood. But they're there very peacefully. So Nathanson went to just observe, and but something happens that day, and I was told this was the main day, his watershed moment, which I'll share with you in just a second. So Nathanson is so moved by the peacefulness because for years he had been around radical pro-abortion feminists and who were, in his own words, they just created pandemonium and they were angry, foul-mouthed human beings that he kind of scratched his head wondering, where do these women come from? And to see these people, most of them were Christians, out on the city sidewalk, and they may have blocked the street. I'm not quite sure. But for sure, the sidewalks, and I believe it was blocking the street, but praying peacefully. They were praying for the abortionist inside. They were praying for the nurses. They prayed for the police. Just everybody they could cover in prayer. They would sing hymns. They were joyful. They had smiles on their face. And Nathanson, he was still an atheist. All he knew was he desired the source of their joy. He didn't understand what they had, but he desired the source of their joy. And then what happens is one of the men, Chris Slattery, who's now with the Lord, Chris Slattery had told Dr. Nathanson about the sit-in. He probably invited him to come to the sit-in, and he was standing there with Nathanson as they were observing the police arrest some of the pro-lifers, maybe who were out in the street or whatever. And then they come for Chris Slattery, and Chris holds out his hands, his wrists, and they handcuff him and they pull him off to the fenced-in area where the people would be arrested. I'm sure Chris was one of the leaders. And Nathanson, and Chris Slattery told me, he said, this was Nathanson's watershed moment. He said, this is when Nathanson, he said he could have walked away, he could have run away, but he didn't. He held his hands out and he got handcuffed and pulled on into that fenced in area with Chris Slattery. Chris Slattery, just as you know, becomes his sponsor, if you will, for his baptism. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you about his baptism. Dr. Nathanson spends 1990 until December 8, 1996, with a spiritual director, Father C. John McCloskey. He's a Catholic priest. Their paths crossed in New York, and I think at one of the universities, but they became very good friends. And Father McCloskey offered to just meet with Dr. Nathanson once or twice a month to smoke cigars and to talk about the great books that they would read. So it took 5 to 5.5 years, pushing 6 years. And Dr. Nathanson told me that somewhere in those 5 to 6 years, he stopped contemplating suicide and he began contemplating the love and mercy of Jesus Christ. And then he and Father McCloskey, they read the Bible together. They studied that. They read the Catholic Catechism. They read great authors like Chesterton and C.S. Lewis, just some of the famous writers of all time. And on December 8th, Dr. Nathanson was baptized. not in the main part of St. Patrick's Cathedral, but down in the crypt area. I think that's what they call it. And it was a super special day. I hope you'll watch the video called Boom. If you go to Hosea Initiative, our YouTube channel, Hosea Initiative, and just search for the Boom video. I I described Dr. Nathanson's video in the words of Chuck Colson, who was probably the only non-Catholic who was there at Dr. Nathanson's baptism. And Chuck Colson, had served many years in prison for Watergate. And while in prison, he too became a child of God. And he devoted the rest of his life to spreading the gospel. And he thought Dr. Nathanson's conversion from America's abortion king to pro-life warrior who traveled the world to a baptized child of God was just one of the best stories of all times. And so I hope you will watch that video. So that wraps up this part from 1984 through Dr. Nathanson's baptism. And the next part we're going to do is to teach the 8-point strategy of deception. Okay, so again, I'm going to wrap this part up with hoping that you will just lift all this up in prayer, and that you, with our prayers combined, that God will knit together everything and I mean we, you, me, everybody who's ever going to watch this video series. So we'll be able to push the truth all over America and drive it down with grassroots to the last person in America, to make sure everybody knows this story, from deceiver to God's divine mercy. Okay, see you on part 4 of 4.